a simple square of bread pudding. Well, or so it would seem. Eggs, milk, bread, but laced with a haunting story of exile, of religious persecution and secret histories. Rich, homey, delicious, yet baked with ironies and complexities too numerous to grasp in one sitting. It was my friend Teresa who told me about capirotada, unwittingly launching me on a culinary obsession that took me halfway around the globe. Capiro what? I said. Capirotada, you don't know it? And forgive me, Teresa, wherever you are, for this awful and reductive impression of you. I thought you knew everything when it comes to food. Capirotada is the best. My abuelita makes the most awesome capirotada ever. So good. Some months after that party, I found myself in the countryside of West Texas, killing a few hours before catching a plane. And there it was again, that word, following me. Capirotada, staring back at me from the plastic-bound menu at a roadside diner. I ordered. The waitress shook me off like a pitcher shaking off a catcher. No, sorry. She sounded so solemn in her apology, she might have been explaining a religious rite. Little did I know. The following April, I returned to that part of the world, but this time on purpose. And this time, I did not miss my taste. It was Lent, and in that region, West Texas, New Mexico, northern Mexico, capirotada is the emblematic dish of that long season of repentance. It was everywhere, in the bakeries, in the diners, and on the table at dinner one night in a small New Mexico town called Ruidos. Atop the pudding, a thin layer of cheese, or, as my beaming host told me, the shroud. Cloves jammed into the cheese, these symbolize the nails that fixed Christ to the cross. Finally, the garnishing touch, 2 cinnamon sticks crossed. This wasn't just a dish to mark the season of repentance. It was a piece of iconography, a capital S symbol, the holy wafer, if the holy wafer had been baked into a cake. That was when it began, my crazy hopscotch of a journey to unearth the story of this not-so-simple dish. I began with the presumption that the recipe would go back a ways. I mean, any dish with such a profound mythology had to have roots in an ancient time. What I had not counted on was that the profound mythology would be so profoundly wrong. I need to mention here that it wasn't in cookbooks or culinary histories that I found the first of my answers. It was in works of cultural and social history, thick books, tomes. I spent months poring over the history of the Spanish Inquisition. At this point, looking at some of these images of Goya depicting the San Benitos of the heretics, you're probably asking yourself, what does a brutal campaign of religious persecution have to do with a rib-sticking dessert? Good question. The answer haunted me and made me hop a flight to Spain. The Holy Office of the Inquisition was precise and methodical, not just in meting out unspeakable acts of barbarism, but also in its bureaucracy. The church kept voluminous records of everything, great or small. And actually, it's in the small that we see just how depraved the church was and how careful in carrying out its mission. In the Archivo Histórico Nacional in Madrid, among the massive mountain of documents detailing the heresies of the Jews and the diverse array of tortures they were subjected to, I found a paper trail to Capi Rotata. It would be hard to get much smaller than that. Why would the church have cared about something as insignificant as a bread pudding? Surveillance. We know that the church was bent on cleansing the Jews from Spanish society. But what took the Inquisition from mere political tyranny into ruthless and frenzied derangement were those Jews who had converted under duress to Christianity, but who professed to live publicly as Catholics. And who professed to live publicly as Catholics, but who clung to their Jewish rituals in private. The Holy Office had a word for these heretics, the conversos, the crypto-Jews, the secret Jews, the Jews in hiding. The conversos lived an anxious double existence. The church kept close watch over their homes, over when fires burned and didn't, over what was hung to dry and not, above all, over what was and was not bought in the marketplace. If, for instance, the conversos didn't buy or consume pork, the literal forbidden fruit for Jews, as prescribed in the book of Leviticus, often it was only a matter of time before they were found out and brought up on charges. Capi Rotata was not emblematic in that way. It was a dish without baggage or really any meaning at all, in any other era, utterly insignificant. But in a time of fear and trembling, when every expression of culture was suspect, this homey dish became a fraught dish, the kind the conversos would have had to shop for and prepare in secret. Having unearthed the paper trail to Capi Rotata, I thought I had uncovered the entire buried history, and I thought wrong. Because what I did not find in Spain, could not find, was Capi Rotata itself. Before the Alhambra decree expelled the Jews in the late 15th century, the cities of Granada, Toledo, and Cordoba had been the seat of Jewish cultural life in medieval Spain. I explored them last November and December, looking for Capi Rotata. But after weeks of searching, I found no evidence, none, not even a trace, that the dish had ever existed. Not in old cookbooks, not in new cookbooks, not in cafes, not in bakeries, not in people's homes. I talked to chefs and artisans. No one had ever heard of it. It was the same in the major cities of today, in Madrid, in Barcelona. Nada. Even among the Jews of Spain, the few who remain, the name elicited blank looks. In Madrid one day, I met the U.S. Deputy Ambassador, Benjamin Ziff, for coffee at a cafe. Ziff is an American Jew, and he spoke eloquently, if tartly, about what he terms the, quote, Jewish erasure from Spain, unquote. At the same time, he told me that Jews are an abiding source of fascination to Spaniards, in part because they exist for them as a kind of pure abstraction. I thought of the museum Adolf Hitler envisioned for the triumphal post-war Germans, a repository of a vanished culture, or of the way many Americans today fetishize the indigenous Americans, the natives. Ziff was very interested in hearing what I turned up about Capi Rotata. But later, when I told him that after months of searching, I had not found a thing, he told me that he was not at all surprised. In his mind, the erasure had been all but total. West Texas, New Mexico, northern Mexico. This land we associate today with Latin Catholics was territory once known as New Spain. Territory that some conversos, the fortunate ones, the ones with means, fled to in the first decades of the 16th century, hoping to escape the long arm of the church. They never conceived that the long arm could grow longer still. But in 1569, the church opened a prosecutorial office in Mexico City. And so these erstwhile conversos who, for a brief time, had lived freely and without fear as Jews, became again conversos. And Capirotada once more was driven underground, becoming over time, with continued conversions and diminished connections to tribe, a dish that today no Jew would recognize as his or her own, but that some Catholics clutch to them as an emblem of their very culture. I returned to the former New Spain, this time with knowledge, with context, with history. In a small town in northern New Mexico, I enjoyed capirotada one night with a wonderful family of 5. It was not Lent, but they were kind enough to prepare the dish for me all the same. Before we dug in, the wife and mother lit 2 candles, white braided candles, just as any wife and mother in a traditional Jewish home would do to welcome in the Sabbath. Next, she sliced into a bread, braided, eggy. A special bread, she said, that looked for all the world like a challah. I said I had never seen these ceremonies performed in a Catholic home and wondered where she'd come by them. A tradition in my family, she said, as she spooned me her pork guisado. Her story, I discovered, is not unique. There are many latter-day conversos, hidden Jews in the former New Spain. And thanks in part to DNA testing and to the pioneering work of scholars such as my friend Stanley Hordes, a kind of recovery movement is underway. An estimated 30 to 40% of the population of this part of the world is of Jewish ancestry. Some have embraced this knowledge, like a free-thinking priest who, having unearthed the truth of his heritage, dubbed himself a rabbi priest and began incorporating Jewish traditions and even liturgy into his sermons and teaching. But most don't know it or want to know it. It takes enormous courage, after all, to accept a culture that you don't know or that is alien to you or that you have spent your life staying apart from. And like it or not, we're all of us, regardless of culture or ideology, essentially and unapologetically tribal, clinging tenaciously to what we believe to be true. In some ways, that was my fascination with capirotada. The fact that so many cling so tenaciously to it, ignorant of history, of truth. Also, the fact that it endures. We talk so much about food as something that sustains us, or more and more as something that entertains and even thrills us. Well, here is proof that food can also define us and divide us and mark out our territory. I'm too much of a realist to hope that one day the Latinized Catholics of the former New Spain will wake up and embrace their true identities. And I don't hold any hope that wherever and whenever capirotada is eaten, the story will now be told. But it should. There is beauty in truth, potential in truth, hope in truth. I cling to the example of the rabbi priest, who saw in the revelation of his history not negation, not confusion, not threat, but rather duality, possibility. The story of Kapurottada is, in the end, not the story of neither nor, but both at the same time. Old world and new, Jewish and Christian, ancient and modern. The story of something messy, complex, and altogether more mysterious, and altogether more real and more painful. Thank you.